All right, good morning, everyone. This is the September 14th meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. I will call to order. We do have a quorum present. Let me get started with the announcements. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment, time permitting. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. So we have Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
And I'm Mary Longacre, Chair of the committee. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince.
Here.
And we also have Holly Backus joining us this morning, our preservation planner.
Present.
Thank you, Holly. And anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative when I call your name. Joining us today, we have Keith Mikulinski from Fuss & O'Neill. Keith, we're not hearing you. You're not muted, but you might want to try exiting and re-entering the meeting. I'm not sure what the issue is. You are not muted, but we're not hearing you. And we also have Sage Hardesty from Fuss & O'Neill.
Here.
Thank you, Sage. And is there anyone else here from Fuss & O'Neill?
Yes. This is Kurt.
Yeah.
You hear me okay?
Yes, Kurt Millman, thank you.
Good morning.
Good to see all three of you here this morning. We also are hoping to have the interim DPW director, Steve Arsenault, join us, but he may not be able to spare the time this morning. And we have Rachel Freeman from the Land Bank here as well.
Hi, Mary.
Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning.
Okay, please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see you and to take care not to share your screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording, and a reminder to silence cell phones, please. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. I am going to make a brief announcement here just to clarify. The Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is meeting twice today. This meeting is the agenda for our 10 a.m. meeting, which is not regarding the Baxter Road relocation project. This is for other business. If you want to join us specifically for the Baxter Road project, that meeting is at 3:30 this afternoon with a different link. And that agenda is available on the town's website with the link. Okay, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. And I'll also remind everyone that if you're not able to attend the meetings in person, you can send comments by email to Vince Murphy, vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. All right, we are now turning to the first item on the agenda. We have an announcement of a new page to collect comments from the public regarding coastal resilience. That page is available in both English and Spanish. The details are in the posted agenda along with the links, and we encourage members of the public to use that to offer comments if that is the most convenient method for them to do so. One of the reasons we put this page up was that Arcadis will no longer be collecting public comment after the Coastal Resilience Plan is delivered, and this page will remain up to allow for public engagement. We are still accepting comments on this page before the Coastal Resilience Plan is put up as well, and we encourage people to do that. The next item, the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge, is launching a climate coffee and conversation in-person roundtable series. The details are in the agenda. That will be continuing through the fall. And just a note that some of our members will be speaking at some of those conversations. Any questions or comments on the two announcements before we go on to the minutes? Remind the public that to speak, please use the raise hand feature. If you're not able to notify us that you want to offer a comment, you can also unmute and speak out just to say your name and you have a comment. Please do not submit comments through the chat. We are not equipped to collect those. So it will be verbal participation only during the meeting. All right, approval of the minutes from August 17th. Vince, can you put those up on the screen? Are there any committee members with corrections or comments about the minutes from August 17th? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Jen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Matt. Roll call vote. All those in favor. Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Joanna Roach.
Aye.
Mary Longacre, aye. Those are approved. And we also have minutes of August 24th. As soon as you're ready, Vince. And if committee members have any comments or corrections to the minutes from August 24th, please let us know. We'll wait for Vince to get those up on the screen. If there are no comments, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. It's Matt again.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Was that Joanna?
It's me, yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll have a roll call vote. All those in favor, Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Joanna Roach.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Those are also approved. All right, the next item on our agenda is a presentation from Fuss and O'Neill on the Children's Beach Pump Station Watershed Stormwater Management Plan. Do we have a lead presenter to start that?
Yes, this is Sage. I will be presenting.
Thank you, Sage. Please go ahead. And let us know if you need to share your screen.
Yes, I would like to share my screen.
I've just given Sage the ability to share.
Sage, are you able to share your screen? There we go.
Yes, is that coming through clearly?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so hello everybody. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. My name is Sage. I work at Fuss and O'Neill, headquartered in Manchester, Connecticut. We worked recently on a conceptual design study of a pumping station improvements to the Children's Beach watershed in Nantucket. So I have this short presentation to share with you guys. Just a word of note ahead of time, there's a lot of information in this presentation and in the conceptual design itself. So at any time, if you have questions, feel free to stop me and I will take the time to answer them. I'll try to run through this as quickly as I can. So, first we have the agenda, just talking about what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to go through the introduction to the project and some objectives. We'll look at some of the conceptual design overviews for the stormwater system, look at some considerations we needed to make for the future climate. Then we'll review the existing condition results, proposed condition results, talk about some challenges we faced, and then provide or shed light on some other storm drainage improvement opportunities, and then wrap it all up in the closing remarks. So, okay. So as I'm very sure everybody on this meeting is aware, Nantucket faces some unique challenges with flooding. And recently the town
Really?
named Fuss and O'Neill to investigate and complete a stormwater management plan for the 355-acre watershed that currently drains to the Children's Beach pumping station located here on Harborview Way. As a quick note, can you see my cursor? Okay, beautiful. Thank you. So this stormwater management plan is going to assess the performance of the pumping station under various climatological scenarios. So our brief objective is to take a look at the H&H hydraulic existing conditions analysis, then compare that against proposed improvements at the pumping station, create some inundation maps to reflect the flood reductions. There was included a conceptual design sketch and a brief budgetary opinion of cost for the improvements. So, this is the watershed. One major area to note that I personally saw myself when I took my field visit to Nantucket was the North Beach, South Beach, and Easton Street intersection that certainly experiences some flooding. And you can see those in the pictures at the top of the screen as well from a 2018 storm. So let's take a look at some of the data we considered in our model. Obviously, precipitation and tidal data is important for this coastal community. For the existing and proposed conditions, we took a look at the maximum monthly rainfall, 2-year, 5-year, future 2-year, and future 5-year storms. And I'll go into those future storms in a moment. And all of our rainfall occurrences were looked at during mean low tide, mean high tide, and then a future tidal elevation that again will be described in a moment. So that's our precipitation and tidal data. We got soil data for infiltration rates from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. And then for our H&H model, we used PC Swim software that is a sort of quasi 1D, 2D hydraulic model, and takes in 1D model elements such as catch basin manholes, pipes that we got from the Nantucket GIS database, elevation data that we got from 2013 post Sandy LIDAR, as well as some very brief topographic survey performed by Baxter 9 and myself in March 2020. Excuse me. So just a quick overview of, the precipitation for the current day that we're experiencing. A typical maximum monthly is 1 inch. Typical 2-year is about 3.1 inches of rain. And then a typical 5-year is about 3.9 inches. And all of our storm durations are 24-hour storms. So moving from current day to future climate considerations, it was first we have to decide what is the operational life of the infrastructure we're trying to create this conceptual design for. So the pumping station was assumed to have an operational life of 50 years, which from 2020 would bring us to the year 2070 for the planning year. And we want to make sure that, if anybody's investing money in such an important piece of infrastructure, it's able to effectively and efficiently do its job in a changing climate, right? So the two pieces of the moving pieces of hydrologic data in the Nantucket region are the relative sea level change projections and the 24-hour total precipitation depth projections. So those are the two that we really tried to focus on for this future climate. So first we'll go to the sea level rise and the tidal influence. So, your committee, CRAC, developed a coastal resiliency plan that we leaned on to help inform what the sea level rise change may look like in 2070. And so in your plan, again, I'm not going to re-educate you on your plan, but just as a summary of what we took from it, we took your conservative advice of using the high sea level rise projection scenario for 2070. And that would produce, depending on which of the two plan or reports you're referencing, either 5.15 feet or 4.13 feet if it's from the NOAA or the University of Massachusetts Amherst report, respectively. So those are the two of note to take for that 2070 planning horizon. And then if you move on to the precipitation depth, RMAT, Resilient Massachusetts Action Team, submitted a Climate Resilience Design Standards and Guidelines report in April 2021. This report is used to help determine design criteria for extreme precipitation. Presented in that report are 3 separate tiered methodologies to determine total precipitation. The first 2, tiers 1 and 2, use, it's like a statistical analysis on the NOAA Atlas 14, current NOAA Atlas 14 precipitation values, whereas the tier 3 is a more involved extreme value analysis of outputs from 14 global climate models. RMAT currently recommends following the tier 2 methodology for determining the design criteria, which is what we did. So just in summary, we took the more conservative NOAA 15.15 feet sea level rise projection from your report for the planning year of 2070 under the high sea level rise scenario. This value aligns well with your recommendation, the conservative recommendation, but also the top elevation of a nearby tide gate, on Harborview Way, that currently reduces the backflow from the Atlantic Ocean into Children's Beach. So we figured once that tide gate is overtopped and water is able to backflow, the pump station is no longer going to be able to efficiently work, no matter the interior conditions of the watershed. So you can see just briefly that for the storm depth, we used the tier 2 methodology, which produces a 22% increase on the current NOAA values for the watershed. And you can see those above. Let me take a sip of water, one moment. All right. So moving on to the existing, so that's the basis of our modeling. We can move on to the existing conditions. So the existing conditions model was used to identify deficiencies in the existing stormwater system model, or infrastructure, but more importantly, was used as a baseline to assess the effectiveness of these proposed pumping station improvements. And in general, the existing conditions kind of confirmed what I heard when I was in the field and speaking to town members of Nantucket, where they saw their flooding. So like I said, kind of the north-south beach intersection with Easton, a couple of cross streets off of Easton, like Wall Street, Harborview Way, certainly experiences flooding, and a lot of flooding is contained to these downtown regions near the pump station for various storm events. So we can take a look at some of these results. So the first thing I want to make a note of, and I made a note of here, is surface flooding on these maps less than half of an inch. So any depths less than a half of an inch of water are not shown on these figures. There's going to be water everywhere. Also, we're looking at maximum flood inundation. So water that rains on the surface before it enters a catch basin, right? So like runoff on a parking lot before it enters a catch basin isn't shown. It's only flooding that is exiting from a catch basin back onto the surface. So where the system is overloaded, right? And so we're looking at a couple of the existing results. And this top row are all under present day climate scenarios. So I'm just showing you the mean high water. So the more worst case of the two. So for a typical maximum monthly storm under mean high water, there is, some water stored in the wetland areas near Brant Point, some of these northern low-lying wetland areas also have water in them, but there's not too much water in the streets that is exited from a catch basin, right? However, once we move on to the 2-year storm, a typical 2-year storm under mean high water, we can see that, North Beach, South Beach, and their intersections with Harborview Way and Easton Street are beginning to experience flooding, as well as Wall Street. The wetland area at Brant Point is still containing the water and preventing it from flooding the neighboring properties. But mainly, Easton, North, South Beach, Wall Street, and Harborview Way are certainly experiencing their flooding, and even down Easton towards Lily Pond. And then 5-year, it's only getting worse. So the flooding is able to track much more south along South Beach, and much more of Easton is currently underwater, or not currently, but predicted to be underwater. And then so when we take a look at the future storms, what's interesting to me, and an interesting observation, is the future 2-year storm. So that 22% increase in precipitation is looking a lot like the current 5-year storm, right? So that's something that some climate change scientists are predicting, that the storms are going to become more intense, more frequent. So 2 years looking a lot like the 5-year, with the North and South Beach Easton, North, South Beach, Easton, and Harborviews experiencing the worst. And then the future 5-year is the worst of them all, of course, with lots of flooding along those aforementioned streets. The wetland area in Brant Point seems to be at capacity, at threat of overtopping into Easton, and the whole region just being underwater. So lots of flooding in the downtown region, some flooding propagating into the upland regions. But let's take a look at what we could do about it. So, excuse me. One potential opportunity is to improve the pump station. So that is the purpose of this stormwater management report. So we took a look at alternatives for pumping station configuration and control improvements as part of this conceptual design, right? And the basis of it is the total volume of stormwater runoff in the watershed during peak rainfall intensity, assuming all of that water has to make it down towards the outfall, right? So that's how we decided to size. And again, the focus of this S&P is solely on pumping station improvements at its current location on Harborview Way. All right, so I'm going to quickly run through our conceptual design. Currently, there is a single 10 horsepower centrifugal pump on Harborview Way. The proposed improvements would be replacing that single 10 horsepower pump with a group of 3 modular precast 35 horsepower pumps. Right, so that's almost like the baseline, the standard edition, right? But the benefit of our conceptual modular pump station design is that as the projected flows increase, either to increasing impervious cover in the watershed, a changing climate, we can add additional modules, i.e. pumps, to that pumping station in parallel to increase the total firm pumping capacity, right? So it has the opportunity to be expanded. And so quickly, I'm just going to run through the summary of the results, and then we can look at some better pictures. So what our models found is, or predicted, is no significant reduction in maximum flood depths for the typical 1-inch storms, those monthly maximum storms, right? And so the conclusion we drew from this is that the maximum monthly storms and the flooding that occurs from them do not appear to be a result of an overloaded existing pump station. It's more so the infrastructure routing the water to the pump station, and that the pump station can handle the stormwater runoff from those storms if it's able to receive it effectively and efficiently. More so, no significant maximum reduction in the mean low water scenarios. So along the similar line, we think the pump station can handle that with that lower tailwater of when the tides are low.
So Sage, can I interject for a moment?
Please do.
I think that's a really important distinction. Is I think that some people reading the report drew the conclusion that there was no point to replacing the pump, and that's not what you're saying. You're saying that the replacing the pump would not have an impact on the conditions because the conditions aren't able to be impacted by the pumping. It's a good solution to the wrong problem, I guess, is one way to put it. It's not that the pumping is ineffective, it's that there's no way for it to be effective because it's not the right solution.
Yeah, I would say it's part of the solution, right?
Yeah, it has another purpose, which is different than what is caused by the monthly storms.
Yeah, the pumping station improvements alone aren't going to solve that problem. I think it needs to be a more cohesive approach. The pumping station certainly provides value, particularly in the larger storms, as it's designed. But if the water cannot get to the pumping station effectively and is flooding in the upland areas before it even reaches the pumping station, it's not the pumping station isn't the limiting factor in that scenario. So to just continue on, the most significant reductions were in the what I deem the biggest problem region, which is that North Beach, South Beach, Easton Street, Harborview Way intersections, where the flooding was worse in the existing conditions. North Beach, South Beach experienced flooding reductions on the order of a fourth of a foot. Excuse me. And the proposed pumping station reduced flood depths on Harborview Way up to half a foot in the 5-year return period storms. So like we said, these lower monthly storms, not as effective. However, once you get to the 5-year, we're really moving a lot of water out of the region. Also, additional benefits of reducing water levels in the wetland areas of Brent Point, providing some more natural storage, and reducing the duration of surface flooding in all the aforementioned streets. So we're flooding for less water for less time. So real quick, let's just look at some of the results. So what we're looking at here is the change in flood depth and maximum flood depth between the existing conditions and the proposed conditions. So the top is the 2-year storm. And as we move from mean low water, mean high water to that future 5.1 sea level elevation at the top of that tide gate, we can see as the tailwater gets higher, the pumping station is having more of an effect at reducing flood depths in the region. And as we get closer to red, that's on the order of half a foot of maximum depth reduction. So isn't too significant in the mean low water scenarios. As you can see in the first column, the expanse or the affected area becomes more expansive in the mean high water. And then in those really worst case scenarios, future 2070 sea level rise, it's much more expansive with much greater flood depth reduction, right? So this is the 2-year and the 5-year. When we look at the future 2-year and future 5-year, which are coming at us, quicker than we had hoped, we can see, again, much more expansive reductions along North Beach, South Beach, Easton Street, and Harborview Way. Yeah, I think the maps speak for themselves. So just in the effort of time or interest of time, I'm just going to move on. Just to talk briefly about some challenges. So, as we've identified, I'm sure it's going to be a complex challenge to overcome the flooding issues in this region. and certainly susceptible to a change in climate given the coastal nature of the community. So the pump station in particular faces a challenge due to its close proximity to the ocean. And if that pump station would remain in its current location, any permanent improvements that are enacted to the facility must consider a change in tidal climate in order to ensure that effectiveness of the pumping station, particularly because this Harborview Way region in some predictions are predicted to be partially or completely underwater by that 2070 planning location. So we found it's important to consider and evaluate potentially relocating the facility further inland or to an area with a coastline elevation, ground elevation greater than 5.1 feet to avoid this water affecting the efficiency of the pumping station by 2070. So that's the pumping station challenges. But not only that, and as we mentioned briefly, there are other opportunities to route water better to the pumping station and just improve the efficiency in the infrastructure upstream. That can also help to improve the pumping station's performance. So, larger stormwater pipes where they can fit, fixing incorrectly pitched existing stormwater pipes to route flows quickly, more frequent cleaning of obstructions, installation of deeper sumps and shallow catch basins to prevent obstructions. Also, we can help to reduce peak flow and volume by utilizing more of the natural surface and subsurface storage in upstream low-lying areas and undeveloped areas. Subsurface storage where it fits underground, and then potentially evaluate the safety of redirecting a portion of the flow to adjacent drainage systems if they have the capacity. Obviously, that have to be evaluated, and also evaluate the redirection of a portion of the flow to a new outfall, just to relieve the overall stress placed on this the current pumping station. So just in conclusion, we have reduction of peak flood depths, or the proposed system has predicted to produce reductions in peak flood depths and reduced durations of flooding, particularly in the downtown area. Little to no meaningful impact in the areas further upstream that we believe are flooding as a result of the ineffective infrastructure getting the water to the pump station, and that the pump station is not able to necessarily drain those areas. And then furthermore, increasing the pumping station capacity alone would, further than what we've evaluated, would not provide significantly better results. It's not that this pumping station isn't conceptually designed to be big enough. We looked at even larger pumps with even larger pumping capacities, and it's just simply the water is not able to, the pumping station isn't the limiting factor. The water is not getting to the pumping station efficiently enough to drain before the upstream flooding occurs. And just other improvements can be made upstream, and that this pumping station is increasingly at risk day by day to be inundated by tidal flooding with this changing climate. So an evaluation to potentially move to look at the feasibility of moving the pumping station further inland or more upstream, so that's less susceptible to coastal flooding, is important. So that's our presentation. Sorry if I went over a little bit over time, but thank you for your time and listening, and I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you very much, Sage. If you want to stop sharing your screen, that would be helpful. And also please send the slides to Vince so that we can publish them on our website. I think that was really helpful to have the presentation to help us understand the report. I am going to note that our next presentation from Rachel Freeman on the land bank is also the Children's Beach watershed area. So if at least somebody from Fuss and O'Neill can stay through that presentation, there might be questions that would be better addressed to you after her presentation. I will pause here and ask the committee members if they have any questions or comments for Fuss and O'Neill for this presentation. Jen?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Sage. That was a really, really interesting presentation, I thought, and I actually ended up having a couple questions for it, although I think some of them might end up being answered by what I know Rachel's going to talk about with their improvement work. Sage, I'm wondering, you mentioned a couple things like, moving the pumping station, improving the drainage system within the whole watershed, adding another pump system. What would be kind of the one most I guess, effective step for the town to take first? Would it be improving the whole watershed drainage piece and maybe doing the wetland restorations, improving the wetlands that kind of used to exist in this area to hold floodwater capacity? Or would it be adding a second outfall pipe? I'm just wondering what would be really the first most effective stage or step to take?
It's hard to say exactly what would be the most effective without, evaluating the impact of making those changes. But the thing I can just say personally, because I've made, not to say I know Nantucket at all, but I did make 2 trips and I did look at a lot of the infrastructure, and installing a new outfall with the same, and again, it's dependent on this location and you'd have to evaluate that, but installing a new outfall would still face some of the similar problems of the existing infrastructure routing the water to that outfall, right? If the highways aren't able to, route the cars to the exit, it doesn't necessarily matter, or it's not as important how many exits you have if they're all stuck on the highway. So I would think, I don't know necessarily if it should be the first, but I just think it's an important thing to take a look at, considering it affects this current outfall and current pumping station. And it certainly would have improvements there, but then, would give you the opportunity to expand or route water to these other natural storage areas like we're about to discuss with the Lily Pond. It just would give you some versatility and variability, in my opinion.
This is Kurt. I just wanted to add to that if I could, Jennifer and Mary, is that all right
Please go ahead. Yes.
So one of the things that we learned through this process was there's that 5.1 foot elevation threshold. There's also a second threshold at the pump station itself at the existing elevation of about 7. And, based on the projections for sea level rise to continue, it would be prudent to look at moving the pumping station farther inland for the long-term results, okay? So that you wouldn't have to move it several times. There are several things that we look at when you're designing the pump station. One of the things that's been brought to our attention several times is aesthetics and the way that pump station looks in the Children's Beach area. If you're going to do anything in terms of a superstructure there, it might meet with some, what's the politically correct way of saying this, opposition from some of the ownership in the area. So, one of the things that we talked about was moving it further towards the outlet of the Lily Pond area, which could, I'm sure you're going to hear some more discussion about perhaps gaining greater storage in Lily Pond, a combination of gaining more storage there, plus moving that stormwater pumping location there, could be an opportunity to buy you some time. And it could still be modular, but, there are a lot of details that would need to be determined, like what would this thing look like? Would it be underneath the ground? Would you have a superstructure involved? How much land area do you have to play with? Like all those things would come into play. And so, one of our recommendations was to do a feasibility study of moving that pumping station further inland. I think that might be the prudent approach in conjunction with or in concert with improvements to the Lily Pond area and also looking at storm drainage infrastructure improvements, like where we have pipes that are sloped in the wrong direction, for instance, and they don't have adequate sumps, those types of things. It's really, it's a comprehensive solution that you really need. And so trying to prioritize which one's more important. They all sort of work in concert with each other.
Kurt, did you look for locations where the pump could be moved to? I mean, do we have opportunities, places of higher elevation that would work?
Yeah, there's sort of an elevation ridge that runs I think it's at West Center Street area, right sort of near the outfall of the pond area. This would be an optimal location to look at.
Okay, we have some hands up. Vince, you had a question, and then we'll go to Jen if you had a follow-up, and I think Holly might have had something as well.
Mary partly covered part of my question about location, and then my only other part of that question that I'd like to bring up now is what routing would you take to get to the outfall location, and would it be all on public property, say road network, or would it have to go through private property?
Let me get my unmute button going there. Hold on. Sorry. We haven't really, the initial, our scope of work was not to evaluate a location for the Children's Beach pumping station, sort of I want to put this in the context of your guidelines came out when we were probably 2/3 or 3/4 through the evaluation, just doing the modeling. So we shifted gears a little bit, but that was beyond what our scope of services was. We focused on, at the time, a replacement at its existing location and how that would work and still be able to utilize the temporary fix that you have in place right now. We haven't done any evaluation of moving it further inland, but other than just look at the inundation mapping and the flooding areas and sort of put a little star or a little pin on, well, this would be an area that we would want to look at.
Thank you, Kurt. Jen, follow up?
Thank you, Mary. Just briefly, and it's interesting listening to the presentation, what you just said, Kurt, about your scope of work, because I think it's a little bit frustrating that maybe we didn't include an analysis of improvement of the drainage of the rest of the watershed in that scope of work, because for me that seems like it would have been the first thing before deciding if the pump was effective. But the other piece of question I have here is just thinking about moving the pump to get it to that correct elevation, and how far can you actually move a pumping station away from your, and then maybe this is a technical question, away from your outfall for it to actually be effective? I just curious as to how that works.
Well, I think one of the important takeaways from setting up this swim model is that you can run those scenarios, right? So you can do the what ifs. Now that you have the infrastructure in a reliable GIS data layer, for instance, you've got the information in front of you to identify pipes that may need some improvements. B, start running scenarios on if we move the pump station here and put that flow, discharge that flow through this network at this rate, what is the outcome? What's going to happen to the hydraulics downstream in those pipes and in those structures? One of the things that we would have to take into consideration is down at the Children's Beach pumping station location now, there are those storm separators, and hydraulically, how do they impact it? Can we move them as well, or does that make sense to move them? There are certainly some other scenarios that would need to be looked at, but the good news is that now that you have the data layer in the model, you can run those what ifs.
Thank you, Kurt. Holly, did you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mary. I was just concerned on where the new location would be, but hearing again that it wasn't included in the scope, I'm sad to hear that. Obviously, from a planning perspective, it would have been nice to have that, but obviously, it's something that the town will have to look into where that would go, and obviously, from a preservation perspective, where it would go, it would be very important aesthetically within the Natural Historic Landmark local historic district. So, thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Vince, can I just confirm, I'm assuming that this report has been forwarded to Arcadis for the Costa Rizanes plan process?
Confirmed.
Yeah, that's what I thought, just making sure. Other comments or questions from committee members at this point? Not seeing any. Rachel, are you prepared to go ahead? And then after Rachel's presentation, we will open up for public comment on this topic as well.
Thank you, Mary. I am.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Do you mind if I share my screen?
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay, so actually, I didn't mean for this to come up first, but this picture was taken just a couple days ago. And when we were discussing the pump station and we were discussing the downstream of Lily Pond issues with flooding, we were driving by and recognized that after one of the large rainstorms, we had a pretty significant bottleneck even getting into the Lily Pond. So there's a series of storm drains all along the length of this puddle, but clearly it's not even making it in there. So that was kind of interesting for us. But that's an aside. But we take note of things like this, and are considering them when we're thinking about Lily Pond. I'm going to just back up for a second and discuss how this came about. This was actually the brainchild of Eric Sadetsky, so I have to definitely give him credit. During his tenure here, one of the things that he really wanted to see happen was a restoration of the Lily Pond. He, and as do I, see that it is an incredible downtown park where you can see tons of different birds. There's a diversity of plant species, including a large number of invasive plant species. It also has a tremendous amount of potential, we think, of the land bank to really be a filtration system for so much of the stormwater in that watershed that we were just looking at. Between that, Lily Pond and Coffin Park, those are two of probably the biggest open space areas within this watershed. So we finally got around to, bringing this project to the forefront and recognizing that we would work with Horsley Witten on it. And Horsley Witten came out and did all of the background work that you actually just saw presented. We looked at all the inputs, we looked at the outflows. We met with Rob McNeil a number of times and talked about things that he was working on and how we could work together with him on some of the projects that we were working on here in this area. One of the things for the land bank that is also a significant issue, which I expect is true for the DPW as well, is that there is a lot of concern from abutters in this area regarding flooding in their basements or their backyards, and increased water basically being retained in the area. So one of the things that recently happened was the sewer department went down and cleaned out one of the major inlets, which is shown up to the north of the screen as new inlet in that area. Right when you're leaving the land bank property, the sewer department went down and cleaned that out. And it was really interesting to see what areas of Lily Pond drained and which areas didn't. I think it's a very interesting point that Cousin O'Neill made with regards to, it's really about the pipes upstream that have the potential to, that need to be working to carry water, I guess. So starting there, we have worked on this design for some time, again, with the goals being increased visibility for the Lily Pond and increased recreational capacity, enjoyment for the public, reduced invasive plant communities, and healthier wetland areas. So really trying to look at the areas that are wet and allowing them to be wet. And increasing the potential for filtration for water that's coming into the park. So what you can see is that we've actually increased some wetland areas. If we start on the southwestern side of the park, this is an area that's currently dry right next to the parking area, but it really kind of wants to be wet. But by creating multiple different opportunities for filtration of stormwater, we're basically potentially reducing our greatest power in this park, it seems like, is reducing the amount of nutrients and sediment and any sort of pollutants leaving the park and heading towards the harbor. So, you know, we've increased also wetland spacing on the southeast corner and created a series of ponded wetlands, you know, with some open water in the center of the park. One of my favorite highlights is really that we have daylighted the stream that runs down towards Children's Beach. Currently that's a pipe and the inlet is a cement inlet. And I think what, you know, just doing this work and being in this process, what we've realized is that if something's accessible and visible and on the surface, it's so much easier to fix and repair and keep your eyes on. And the idea of having this section of pipe go away and have it be an above ground stream provides a lot of opportunity for us to maintain it. It also provides opportunity for flooding. You know, this is going to be another situation where we're working on creating basically a floodable park. If there ends up being quote unquote too much water in here and wetlands overtop their banks, that's expected and that's what we're hoping for. In our work thus far, we have not seen that just because of high groundwater that we would really be able to increase flood storage capacity, but we are still continuing to look into that. And again, you know, I think Lily Pond can hold a lot of water, but it's about getting the water in there at this point. And then it's also about getting the water out. So as much as we need a healthy inlet, we need healthy outlets as well, so that it can actually be a successful filtration system. So that's where we are now. These are really conceptual designs. Our next step is to take this to neighbors and committees like CRAC and the town and get feedback. And so once we have feedback from abutters and all the interested parties, then we could take it to the next level of construction design. And I think that's what I wanted to share this morning.
Thank you, Rachel. Just from my perspective, I see Wesco Place and I see Lily Street. How close is it Gull Island Lane that comes into that area? I don't see that on the map.
Okay, so I probably should have oriented everyone. So there's Lily Street. On the northeast section there where it says upland species habitat, Gull Island runs into the backside of that house, basically, that is right by the north arrow.
Okay.
And the town's pipe system, you know, would really start in our mind where the new inlet is. It would go underground there. Because right now that is where the pipe runs, basically. So, and then this up by the welcome area sign is actually that tiny little road that goes down to 36B Lily, which is the new house being built by Blue Flag. And then you run along Lily Street. The entrance on the southeast is from Academy Hill and Snake Alley. And we're proposing a cascading bioswale here to, again, catch runoff from the street, slow it down, and provide filtration options even before it hits the wetland. And then as you move around onto North Liberty Street, this is the typical, the existing land bank parking area that's there now, and that's not slated for any changes. Does that help orient?
Yes, thank you. Questions or comments from committee members? Jen, go ahead.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Rachel. This is really exciting to see this coming forward. It's a project I've really been interested in, the restoration of Lily Pond out here. I'm curious, you mentioned about the water needing to go somewhere and what an outlet is. Are there outlets that exist on the property just now, or is it just water infiltrating to groundwater?
So I think, I'm trying to think, what is the best figure for me to show you? Hang on for 1 second here. I'm going to switch figures. Also, please, if you can't hear me for some reason, let me know. My window is open and it's loud downtown. This is the final report, which I'm perfectly happy to share with anyone. It's huge, so it's difficult to pass along.
Will it be posted on the Land Bank's website?
You know, that's actually a really good point. We certainly could post it on the Land Bank's website. We should, because it's too big. Right now it is in a Dropbox. So, and you saw some of these with Fuss and O'Neill. Ours are a little different. These are drainage areas. So these are inputs into Lily Pond that we spent actually a ridiculously huge amount of time looking for and vetting, because there's a lot of different information. I'm sure Fuss and O'Neill could tell you that as well. And some of it's more accurate than others. But as of right now, you have a drainage that comes in on Wesco Place. It doesn't actually go all the way down Wesco Place. It stops right here. And you can see that there's actually a sandbag there, which sort of indicates the current drainage. Drainage 2 and 3 are in that region where I just showed you that flood that happened the other day, that giant puddle. So those clearly aren't functioning very well. These are inputs. Drainage area 4 comes from between these houses, but also from North Liberty. 5 is over by Snake Alley. 6 is over by Lily Street. And then your outlet is this single pipe outlet right here, which does actually go through all these houses. And that's what the sewer department recently cleaned out. And they were able to access it by American Seasons, basically on Center Street. There's a manhole there, and they were able to snake something through it and all the way down up into, they reached basically this area of the pipe. And for a long time, there's always been a huge amount of concern that this pipe was crushed or broken. But the fact that the sewer department could actually successfully snake something down it suggests that it's not the case that it's crushed or broken. Probably needs to be repaired, but is still functional at some level. Was very, very blocked up. Over on Gull Island Lane, there's the wetland here that is filled with purple loosestrife usually around this time of year.
Yep.
That also has a drainage that comes out of it and meets with this pipe right here. And they both come in together into that one area of Center Street. And so that also was cleaned out by the sewer department. But currently right now, that is the only outflow. Again, it made a huge difference when the sewer department cleaned it out. It actually drained all of that wetland by Gull Island. It was completely full of water. It drained it entirely. And one of my goals actually is to put in water level indicators in the Lily Pond, just to see how the water level is changing during storm events. And with, you know, maintenance or no maintenance of some of these inflows and outfall pipes. So, well, single outfall pipe. Is that
When did the sewer department do the clean out?
I'm gonna have to look at my notes, but it was within the last 6 months. It was something that we've been asking for and talking about for a really long time. And then one day it just happened. It's really kind of interesting. I got an email that said, we just cleaned this out. And it was the pipe reclogged within about 24 hours because there was so much flowing through it. So they came back and did it a second time. And then I have to assume it stayed open for a while. How long that's actually going to stay open for, I don't know. A single pipe as an outflow for this area may be entirely insufficient. But there's some huge easement issues. As you can see, this pipe runs across a number of private properties. And that has always been described to me as one of the major challenges in replacing it. So we're going to make it a stream on our property as long as we can.
Vince has a
Thank
comment.
you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mary. So it's kind of hopefully not too much of a mouthful of comments, but for the outflow and or keep the stream active and don't take this the wrong way, not overload the town drainage system that this ultimately goes to. Do you know the diameter of the pipe? I'm guessing you don't. Maybe the sewer department might. That's under those private properties that goes to American Seasons, that pipe there. And I suppose this might be a tieback for Fuss and O'Neill. Would they be able to recommend a diameter for that pipe? And then in order to keep water in the wetland, would you have to put some kind of check valve system to be able to effectively close it and hold water in a bioretention type area during or until after a storm event? Is that something that's on your mind as well? And what would that kind of flooding do to your wetland habitat?
Yes, we have discussed that. That would come about as a component of any sort of construction drawings. And I was thrilled to be sent Fuss and O'Neill's work because I feel like they would be a great group to reach out to. This really does have to be a joint project between the land bank and the town, and that's how we were approaching it originally. And we recognize that this has potential to be a bit of a holding pen, and I think that is what it's meant to be. Wetlands are meant to flood. That's our intention here. So the floodable marsh system we're completely open-minded to during storm events, and what that looks like, I'm not exactly sure yet. I don't know the diameter of that pipe, but that would be important information to have in our design process.
Thank you, Rachel. Any other comments or questions from committee members? Peter.
Yeah, Rachel, you guys are, if there's a storm event, potentially you're talking about seawater backing up into the lily pond. Am I making sense? And if that's the case, doesn't that kind of kill everything in there?
We have talked about that, and we feel like if you have seawater, if we get to a storm event where there's seawater backing up into the lily pond, there's been a lot of issues before that might be more major, because that's going to have to be a really big storm. And it could happen. I'm not saying it can't happen, and we have actually talked about it. And whether or not there's potential for lily pond to have holding capacity in that regard, I'm not sure, but there's a lot that's gone wrong that are probably bigger issues than the marsh being infiltrated with salt water at that time. This was kind of our consensus. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from committee members before we go to the public? All right, Rachel, would you take down your screen share? And if there are members of the public, please use the raise hand, or you can send a chat message to me or Vince, just letting us know that you want to make a comment. But remember, all comments should be made verbally and not through the chat. I'm not seeing anyone. Okay. So thank you both to Fuss and O'Neill and to the Land Bank. Really great info, and happy to have it presented here today. Rachel, if you do get that report on your website, we would love to have a link so we can include that in the minutes so we can share the presentation. You didn't present the entire report, but so could you send us the 2 slides that you did present today, so make sure we have those, but if we would love to get the full report.
I could also send it up through Dropbox to Vince. So
Yeah, whatever Vince can do with it is great.
Okay.
All
Great.
right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So next item on our agenda is the draft for the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's annual report for fiscal year 2021. So we had seen a draft previously. And I looked at some of the other reports from last year's town annual report and saw that some of them used a format that grouped things by category rather than a chronological format, and that seemed to make a lot of sense for us. So I rewrote the draft of the report using that format. Vince, if you're able to get that up on the screen. And so the question would be for committee members, are there any other items that you wanted to note? Is there anything that we should take out? Just looking for input so that the report reflects the ideas from everyone in the committee. There was one thing in here that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention, and that was we started to get a little bit beyond the activities of the committee and more into the activities of the Coastal Resilience Coordinator and the Coastal Resilience Plan Project Team. And so we may need to edit a little bit of the information out because it doesn't really apply to the committee's work. And that's specifically where we get to public outreach, where we say, in addition to public presentations and CRAC meetings, the CRC and the project team worked with about 120 stakeholders, such as other town boards, committees, and commissions, and relevant local nonprofit and resident organizations to educate them about the CRP development and coastal resilience. So that sentence doesn't really reflect the activities of the committee members. I think it's valuable in the context of the coastal resilience plan, which is our #1 priority. But the question is for consideration of length and any other reason should we remove that? Vince?
Sorry, I had to unmute. So just to put in a minor edit, if it's kept for a start, the typo on my behalf, it should probably be 100 plus rather than 120 plus. I mistyped 102 as 120.
Okay, so we'll definitely edit that to 100 plus. And I had asked Vince to clarify on the stakeholders. There is a list that we have, remember about 2 years ago, we put that together that we can reference to say where that 100 comes from. Obviously, we don't want to list all 100 of them in the annual report. Jen?
Thank you, Mary. As far as whether or not to keep that in, I kind of think it makes sense to keep it in since we as CRAC put the stakeholder list together in concert with Vince and kind of directed him and the project team to do this outreach work. I think that was part of the push of what CRAC wanted to see happen for the plan. So I don't see an issue with leaving it in.
Right, I think we can hang our hat on that. That's a nice connection, Dan. Further comments or questions from committee members? Matt?
I was just going to say leave it in because people are always going to ask, well, who did you talk to? I didn't know anything about this. It's good to know that we've made the effort.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. All right, so that can certainly stay. Any other comments or questions? I did notice that the town's annual report includes a list of the members of each committee at the beginning. So I didn't feel that we had to repeat the list in our report. So that was one way that we were able to save space from the previous draft. If there are no other comments or questions about the text on page 3, I have a suggestion for a graphic to request to be included. And here we were looking for something that would help communicate the scope of what we're talking about. And but it had to be pretty self-explanatory. We couldn't get into a highly technical document. And when I was looking through the Arcadis presentations, I found their group note-taking screen, which I think we'd have to redo slightly because of the font sizes might be too small and so on. But I thought this was a great way to capture the public outreach, the public comments, the scope of the CRP. It seemed like a good single image to represent what we were working on. And I'd like the committee's feedback on that. Vince, I don't know if you can make that any larger on the screen for people. You can see the problem with the small text.
Does it appear any larger now, Mary?
Yeah, you did zoom in a bit, yes. So any thoughts on an alternate diagram, or if we want to include a diagram, or if this is the direction we want to go?
Mary, if I
Holly?
may, I just wanted to mention that I think this is a great idea, including this image, just because it not only does it capture the process through the coastal resiliency plan, which has been the main focus of this commission to get going and go through, but also it kind of also reflects on what we've had to do with Zoom this past 18 months, and that here is part of the public outreach and what that looked like visually. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Thank you, Holly. Peter?
You know, maybe just take all the stickies away because you're blocking part of Nantucket and put the text around with arrows pointing to the areas you're talking about. Because you're blocking part of the island. I mean, and of course, make the text bigger.
Yeah, I've talked to Vince, and I think we would have to redo this. So this is concept stage.
Right.
Not all of the comments refer to specific locations, but I think definitely we want to have a little bit better organization, fix the font sizes so that they can be read easily. And the boxes have different sizes, and that's a random effect, if I remember correctly from the presentation. So I would want to make them more equal so that we're not trying to say that there's a greater weight because it's a bigger box or anything like that. Vince?
If you choose to go with this image, I've already asked Trevor for a cleaned up version of this so that higher, so that it isn't quite as fuzzy. So if you just want me, I could remake this and say that came from the original came from draft of, I think it was from the January virtual open house, and just say that this is an edited version of that.
Yeah, edited for presentation, right. Okay, so it sounds like that's the direction we want to move in. We are always happy to take comments by email to Vince on the report from the committee members if you have an idea. But I think what we'll do is prepare a final, get that graphic, and come back for a vote for adoption. So thank you all for that. Hopefully we'll get it done by November 1st. We have a few things that are going on right now. Next item on the agenda, November 1st is not that far away. An update, speaking of not far away, update on the Coastal Resilience Plan timeline from Vince, including Arcadis involvement after delivery of the Coastal Resilience Plan. So just a reminder to the committee, we are expecting to meet next Tuesday, the 21st. And we had decided previously to have 3 meetings in September, so we would also meet on the 28th. Vince, you want to give us an idea of what to expect for those meetings from Arcadis and where we are in the Coastal Resilience Plan and where we are after it's delivered?
Sure, thanks, Mary. So there's a very broad timeline and it is subject to some change. So I'm going to be speaking in quite general terms, if that's okay. Just to pull up the calendar. So the next 2 CRAC meetings are going to be taken up by Arcadis. That's the 21st and 28th. Hopefully speaking, the meeting on the 28th will be a presentation on the CRP. Hopefully before that, a draft will be made available to this committee for review. So you'll have some reading to do before the meeting on the 28th. So you'll have some background to understand it. It'll just be a draft, and similar to how the Baxter Road one went, if everything goes to plan and if I get it in enough time in advance, I'll be able to post it as a draft to the town website so that not just the committee, but everyone else will be able to view it as well. Fingers crossed, touch wood. Then committee members will be able to put in comments, give any feedback that you want to give, either at the meeting on the 28th or in writing before or after that. We're going to have to probably set some kind of time limit after the 28th. I don't know it yet, so I'm just putting it out there as an idea. Then they're going to take the committee's comments, go back, adjust whatever needs to be adjusted. They're working on graphics as much as everything else is the text. The graphics are coming along nicely. They're just, they have to have the text somewhat approved in order to have the graphics make sense. So the graphics kind of have a lag time behind text. So there might be incomplete pieces or just a holder image in the version you get. So that's something just to bear in mind for when we do get it. And there are things that will be corrected after the 28th. The final delivery date, don't hang your hat on this, but it's penciled in for the 15th of October. So that's only 2 weeks after the delivery date. If it can happen sooner, fair enough. But that's kind of the way that it's looking at the moment. In pencil, I wouldn't write it in Sharpie just yet. That's the kind of main highlight. We also at the select board meeting on the 8th had that contract extension that I was mentioned previously. I'm just sorry, I didn't somebody. So it's a very simple $0 contract extension. It partly covers Arcadis for this 2-week overrun, but more than anything, it's to cover the what was the correct wording? The additional services budget that's now going to be used for developing grants. It's the $27,500, and that's going to be used between the delivery of the CRP and whatever the key projects that come out of it, 1 or 2 key projects, to develop those into something that can be ready for a grant application, basically. And that contract extension runs through the end of January 2022. So it's not a major extension, and it's only to cover, but mainly to cover the additional services and whatever 2 weeks and maybe correction time after that, so that eventually this committee can vote to accept, or as the committee chooses to not, or whatever the case may be. So does anyone have any questions on the broad outline of that timing?
Okay, I don't see any there. Thank you, Vince, for that. It's good to know where we're headed. So updates on other related and concurrent coastal resilience projects is the next item on the agenda. We are meeting this afternoon for Baxter Road, so we'll not say anything more about that right now. Jen, I had one question on the Trustees of Reservations and Conservation Foundation plan. Do you have a delivery date estimate on that?
We don't have a delivery date estimate, but I could give a short update now if you would like.
That would be wonderful. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and right after that, if it's okay, I could give a little bit of an update on the Hither Creek project as well, because we did the field sampling.
Great.
Awesome. So we're just awaiting the delivery of it. They're finishing up the modeling and the recommendation analyses for CO2, the joint project between the trustees and the reservation. As a reminder, we hired a consultant to look at a few areas that we identified as at risk already on the 2 properties, and to look at possible solutions for maintaining resiliency, thinking about sea level rise and storms. That is coming hopefully in the next week or 2. And we will do a public meeting when it's done and release it. I wanted to just make a point on it as kind of actually related to, I wasn't at the meeting 2 weeks ago, but Trevor presented and some potential solutions for that area. And some of them run along with what we're planning on doing, but looking at raising elevation, which was really the main problem out there, is figuring out how we maintain elevation. For our areas on CO2, we're primarily focused on the space between first point and second point. That's the area that we actually identified as the most susceptible, and it's really flooding not from the outer beach side, but from the harbor side. Flooding up and then breaching through the road access and potentially eroding away there. And what we've identified runs more towards potentially adding elevation using sand within the inner portion of CO2 and not on the beaches. And this lines up actually with a comment that I really appreciated that Pete made at the last meeting, was that adding sand within those phosphate spits is potentially an issue for how those spits are developed and maintain themselves. So our action is actually looking at raising elevation more towards the center area, or the actually established dunes in the center of Coatue, and then potentially doing salt marsh restoration along the interior, because the salt marshes will actually hold the water that's coming in, which is really the primary issue with Coatue, is excess water with storms. If there's enough of it to force itself over the dune, then you might get a breakthrough. But if we have salt marsh wetlands on the interior of Coatue, they could actually capture that water and potentially hold it so it doesn't break through Coatue. That's kind of the setup that we've at least discussed with our consultants that NCF is looking for on our portions of Coatue. And if it's successful in being implemented in that one area, then we'll start to assess the rest of the area out there. So that's the update on what's happening with resiliency for Coatue so far.
And Jen, do you think that you will be able to connect with Arcadis to have that conversation about the different approaches?
I did send an email this morning after I had finished watching everything from last week with all of my comments and things, since I wasn't able to give them in the meeting itself. I just wanted to make sure it got on the record. And I actually, Pete, that I really appreciated you bringing that up, the issue with careful sand placement on Coatue. So I wanted to get that on the meeting record today.
Great.
Absolutely. And then, and I can, if anyone has any questions afterwards, Hither Creek, this is the area that NCF worked in collaboration with the town to actually do some planting out at the end of Hither Creek, where the big washover was near Millie's Bridge back in 2017, where the stilt house had been turned into a big, essentially sand field that the dunes were accumulating on, but not necessarily vegetating on quickly. And NCF have been doing monitoring out there since it happened to see if the salt marsh would reestablish or how fast the grasses were coming back. We planted in the spring a whole bunch of beach grass, and we did plant some woody shrubs out as well. And so I actually got out last week to monitor the effectiveness of it, and the grass is amazing. The grass has established really well. I think I saw one dead grass plug in all of the plugs that were out there as I was tromping through. So that was extremely successful. The shrubs, not as much, although a month ago I thought they were all dead. Last week there was resprouting on a lot of areas that had looked like they were dead plants. So we have about a third of the woody shrubs, it looks like, are establishing through the area. And then I'll check again next spring, because it could just be that they haven't regrown. But we're hoping that those will add a little bit more stability and capture more sand. But it looks like the planting piece itself was really successful out there. And the rest of the area that we didn't plant, there is a lot of beach grass coming in naturally, a lot of dunes reforming. There's actually a lot of a state listed endangered plant that's all over the place out there, which is great. And within the tidal zone, we are actually getting salt marsh plants reestablishing. So there's the potential that the salt marsh will regrow itself, at least where the tide is coming in. So it's kind of a natural resilience effort that we're facilitating and is recovering on its own a little bit.
That's great news. Thank you, Jen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Questions or comments for Jen on her report? Vince?
Just a tiny one. Is the state listed plant sea beach knotweed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was there before, and it has now massively expanded this year. It's quite happy. It likes that dynamic system out there.
Okay, Vince, just checking Sheep Pond Road access, any changes or updates there?
Nothing major other than to say that we're looking at trying to reestablish contact and start to begin that plan for a new access point and a new access road through that whole area. So that's going to take some consultation with property owners in the area and NCF. There's been a lot of conversation about the routing, and I imagine once we restart the conversation, which kind of hasn't really progressed since the late spring, early summer, that conversation will kick back up again. People will have new ideas of routing, and we'll just have to take it from there. But this is something that I anticipate to start moving quite decently in the next 6 weeks.
Thank you, Vince. I'll note here that the land bank, is looking at coastal resilience. Rachel, you're still on. If you wanted to say anything about the broader scope of the land bank's plans for coastal resilience, we do plan to ask Jessie Bell to come and speak to that topic, probably at some point in late October, early November, depending on the coastal resilience plan progress.
Okay, great. The land bank right now, as you know, is working with the Woodsville group. And our current focus is Washington Street, and that project is, well, the initial report from that project is almost complete. And from there, we will be expanding into other high priority areas on land bank property. We are looking at this as a learning experience for the commission and the public, and we are planning to do a public presentation where we can discuss what floodable parks are and what their purpose is, and how public parks can dovetail really nicely with coastal resiliency, particularly in areas like Washington Street, where you can have alterations in topography and rain gardens and all sorts of different things, salt marsh restoration, living shorelines, which can all positively impact the infrastructure behind the park system, but yet falls nicely within the land bank's mission of recreation, conservation, and agriculture. So that is where we're at currently. I think the one thing that is not overtly stated, but perhaps understated, is that we're more and more of our projects, such as things like Lily Pond, are going to be appearing with a coastal resiliency component. So I would say almost every project we do that is coming up as a discussion point. And there's areas where we're selecting a retreat. There's areas where, we're doing more intensive designs, and it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. But I think really the next step for us is to expand our work with the Woodsville group to look at where we should be allocating our resources.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'll ask the same thing that I asked of Jen in the Conservation Foundation. If you're able to connect with Arcadis to share your approaches, it would be helpful to know that the Coastal Resilience Plan was able to incorporate the best information that you had.
Definitely.
Thank you. Are there any other coastal resilience projects? There are many of them now. Are there any others we haven't covered today? All right, we'll move on to public comment. So this is for any of the topics on today's agenda or otherwise. If there are members of the public present who want to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature or let us know in the chat that you wish to speak. Emily Molden, please.
Hi there, Mary. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and for everyone. Some great presentations this morning. I just wanted to take a moment to comment because after reviewing a little bit more with RJ and some other folks on our board, Arcadis's presentation with their draft recommendations from last time, we just have some questions and comments that we could contribute, and recognizing that there's not really a lot of time on today's agenda to do that, and there isn't someone from Arcadis here, I'm thinking maybe it makes more sense to just put those in writing to provide them to you guys. So I think I'll probably just opt to do that instead of going through them. I think that might be a little bit of a waste of time. So I'll plan to do that if that makes.
Yes, thank you, Emily. That would be helpful. Our plan is to allow time at the beginning of each meeting with Arcadis to solicit comments from the previous presentation. So I would encourage you to attend next Tuesday as well. Hopefully there will be time and space for you to present your comments, but I think we'd really like the heads up to get them in email. I'm sure that you have some valuable things to add there. Vince?
I'm just going to send Emily the comment
The
email
link?
address.
Yeah.
For either the PRAC one and the CRP one for Arcadis, so that you can comment through both or send it to me directly, and I can forward to the committee as necessary.
And I'll just piggyback on that a little bit to mention that any conservation or any social organization on Nantucket, please, take a moment to share those comment resources so that we can get the most public input that we can. The Coastal Resilience Plan, while it is certainly scientific and grounded in the reality of what's happening in the environment, it's nothing without the input and the interaction with the community, because that is just as important.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that, and I'll do that. I'll get those provided on those two portals and also to Vince prior to next Tuesday's meeting, and we'll try to attend then as well. And then just one quick follow-up question after hearing a little bit more about the timeline and having a draft plan submitted to the committee members, maybe at the end of this month or into early October. Will it then, I presume, also be made available to the public in advance of a scheduled meeting for comments and feedback?
Vince?
Yeah, hopefully, yes. I'm anticipating it, fingers crossed, the Thursday or Friday beforehand. It could be quite late in the day, but I'll just endeavor to get it on the town website if I can. Otherwise, it might be the Monday morning, but certainly try and make as much as I can, as publicly available as I can, for the public to comment through the CRAC meeting on the 28th.
And it's not going to be a small document, so more time the better.
Yeah, and I'm going to just try and make everything as open as I can, but there might be limitations, just to make that point early on and forewarn people, but as much as I can get up, I will.
Great.
Thank you, Vince. We have Deanne Atherton who wants to comment.
Yes, Mary, thank you. I apologize with the thumbs up. I don't quite know how to use that mechanism here, but I had an addition to follow up what Emily was discussing about the process here for the Coastal Resilience Plan, also the Baxter Road Plan. Prior to the draft being made available to the public, does it undergo an internal staff review?
Vince?
Yes, that has taken my week and last week and this week away from me.
Okay,
thank
you.
Yeah, oh, and just in case anyone's curious, I'm not the only reviewer. There's a team of us internally and interdepartmentally taking in 3 town departments that are going through this at the moment.
At some point, could you just tell us who are the other members of that internal team?
And if we're going to do it, we want to make sure we're specifically answering which plan is being reviewed by which people. I don't know if there's overlap.
For the CRP, if people don't mind, it's myself, Jeff Carlson, Holly Backus, and Chuck Larson. For the Baxter Road, it was myself, Jeff Carlson, and Chuck Larson.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you. Thank you, Vince.
Other members of the public who are present and wish to comment at this time? I'm not seeing anybody, but if I'm missing you, please let me know. Next item on our agenda is committee, and I've changed this agenda item to say and Natural Resources Department reports, since Vince is involved now in many things. When he has the opportunity to tell us what's going on outside the Coastal Resilience Plan, I wanted to make sure we had a spot on the agenda for that. And I know that Vince recently made some presentations. I was present at the Civic League meeting, spelled Nantucket wrong. That's unusual for me on the agenda, but and Vince made a presentation there and it was very well received. So Vince, if you want to talk about that and also the Mattocket Erosion Control Group.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. So the Civic League one was this day last week. And it was practically a 2-hour meeting. I was given 20 minutes to speak. I pretty much exceeded it. But then the questions afterwards were quite valuable as well. I understand that the whole thing was recorded. I just recently received a link for it. That was basically the presentation style that I did. I just went over a small bit of the background, just talking about sea level rise and erosion and risk assessment. but the bulk of what they wanted to know in that presentation was about what to expect from the CRP. So, and I quite unashamedly said it, and I tried to name check as many of the crack meetings as possible. I said that over 3 crack meetings from July 27th, August 14th, and August 28th, if I remember rightly, we were given over 5 hours worth of presentations, and I cherry picked information from throughout those 3 presentations and tried to condense it into 20 minutes that would be able to give as much information to the Civic League and their membership as possible. And it worked out quite nicely. I have that presentation. I can make it available to anyone that wants it. It's just a condensed version, so to speak, of some of the finer points that we've already seen at these meetings.
And there is a recording of that presentation available on YouTube. Was recorded by NCTV. So if you search Nantucket Civic League on YouTube, you'll probably be able to find that.
And then on August 31st, I had a terrific chat with the Madagat Erosion Working Group. They were interested to know what to expect for the Madagat area. Rightly so, there's been such tremendous erosion in that area, and they're very concerned, and a lot of homeowners are extremely concerned, and I've been working as closely as I can with them. I attend pretty much all of, so it is the Madagat Conservation Association has a subgroup called the Madagat Erosion Working Group, and I attend all of their meetings, or most of them at any rate, and try and come up with all kinds of ideas and what to expect from the CRP, what we might try and include in the CRP. There's also undoubtedly the Joe Farrell project, and I had to say quite openly that there was 2 things that Joe Farrell had suggested for the Madagat area that seem like they're not going to be included in the CRP for very specific reasons. One is the beach module thing, idea of putting 2 beach modules and allow sand to accrete behind them as the downdrift sand builds up on the beach. He also had found this process from Florida where they use beach netting. That goes down into the tideline and allows sand to settle and accrete, mainly put in place for the winter months. It is a very interesting system, but once the team started looking at both of them, basically they're unproven technologies for this part of the world. The beach modules is something that is incredibly interesting and also incredibly difficult, which is why it's taken the better part of 10 or 12 years of research on the part of Joe and his team. The Madagat Conservation Association Erosion Working Group are working to see if they can help put a permit together that would eventually go to CONCOM and MassDEP, and probably, because it's in the intertidal zone, also US Army Corps of Engineers, to see if it would ever be permissible. And that is something I'm trying to help them on, but it's effectively their project. The other one is called New Shore, the N, capital N, small u, capital S, SHORE. And it's a very interesting system, but it's only been employed on what you could only describe as much more low energy beaches. And there's substantial questions about would that be effective or even stand up to one of our mild winter storms or a nor'easter around here. Effectively, they're unproven technologies. Well, they're useful in Florida and have also been used in Georgia, but that's the better part of 2,000 miles and much milder storms away. But they're winter storms compared to our winter storms. So there's substantial questions. That's not to say either of them are being dismissed. They're just not going to be part of the CRP because they're going to more or less focus on what are known and quantifiable and implementable technologies around our shoreline. So that was the basic tenet of what one of the major takeaways from that meeting, but they're going to try and progress with both of them. If there's any other erosion working groups or any other civic league type groups or any other groups that just want me to attend and be available to answer questions, I'm always happy to attend.
Thank you, Vince. Are there other committee members that have reports from their representative committees? And today, I guess that would just be Matt or Peter. We've already heard from Jen. I don't know if either of you have anything to add, and if not, Matt, did you have something or?
No, that's all right. I'm good.
All right. So new business, as I said, we will be meeting September 21st and 28th this month. There were a list of potential topics. I did add a few. In particular, I wanted to call out the Rescuing History Nantucket in Response to Rising Seas online conference that was last Thursday and Friday. That was sort of tangential to coastal resilience, but it had some very good info, particularly on the first day. On the second day, Holly was one of the presenters, and Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge was one of the presenters. So it was information that we would be more familiar with. But it focused on preservation of buildings, but also on using solar energy in a system. And certainly the most important thing that we can do for coastal resilience is to stop making the seas rise so fast by reducing climate change. Let's see. So those are all things that could be topics for future consideration. I'm not going to keep including them on the agenda. I also wanted to call out the Mariah Mitchell Association lecture from Dr. John Hare. That was regarding fisheries. And again, sort of tangential to coastal resilience, but definitely impacted by climate change, and something that we are considering as we talk about coastal resilience projects to not negatively impact the fisheries. He had an excellent presentation as well. I would recommend that. The links for both of those are in the agenda. Do any other committee members have comments at the end of the day here? If not, we can take a motion to adjourn, and we will be meeting again at 3:30.
So moved.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jen. So roll call vote. Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre. Aye. Thank you all very much. See you later. Vince, I wasn't clear on whether you were recommending that comments be submitted through all three portals, or if only one method of communication was sufficient to reach everyone.
Yeah, so for sending it to Emily Molden, I'm sending her all options, but they're just options. She can do whichever ones she wants.
Okay, let her know she doesn't have to do all three, because it sounded like she might try to do that.
Just going to stop the recording.